acceptance is a big thing. Like wanting to be accepted is, I think, a superhuman trait. So I get it. I understand that.
Wow.
What's up, everybody? My name is MichaelStephenson. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You are currently watching my art/entertainment industry series. It is a series in which I talk mainly about film and television. Sprinkled in is a little bit of stuff about publishing, stuff about music, etc., etc., and why things feel differently today. This is, if this is your first video here, I would ask that you please go back and watch some of my previous videos. I'm trying to build sort of a foundation here, sort of a lingo or language specifically for the channel. And I've done quite a few foundational videos that have built up a shorthand so that I can say things like, this is the Avatar era, and you'll know what I'm talking about, or this was the Rocky Horror Picture Syndrome effect, etc., etc. This is actually both a foundational video as well as a video specifically for Marvel month. I felt like I needed to do this video really in order to get, it's kind of a video that needs to be gotten out of the way, so to speak, just so that we can understand maybe a little bit of what is actually going on with us when we talk about certain films. So that is the culture of acceptance. That's currently what I'm calling it. You can also call this the cycle of acceptance. You can call it the culture of acceptance effect or theory or syndrome or whatever you really want to call it there. But it kind of is a theory or an idea that in some ways dictates a lot of what we are seeing when we're talking about film in general, but specifically when it comes to comic book and superhero films. Okay, so let's step back and let's dig into it. And hopefully this is going to be a fairly shorter video. So first off, let's begin with this fact. When I was first trying to put together these videos, and again, if this is your first video, then you don't know that I've been thinking about doing this series on why film and television and entertainment in general feel so differently for really roughly about a decade. And that's before all these other channels started to pop up and talk about how bad film or how bad television is, etc., etc. And in that, I was going to, all of my the way in which I was going to tackle this problem or these issues is that I wasn't just going to do a broad thing and say the same couple of 5, 6, 7 things that you hear on these channels all the time. That, oh, the characters suck, that the writing was bad, that this was bad, yada, yada, yada. But I was going to dig into them a little bit more in greater detail and also look at things through various paradigms that we have built up and see why certain things or certain topics, certain concepts and ideas and ideals were affecting how we not only interpret, but how we talk about, how we communicate, and how we ultimately enjoy the entertainment that we are consuming. And so I divided it up. Race was going to be pretty much the last topic that I was going to cover because it was going to be so expansive. That's probably the most controversial one. Then, of course, I also had stuff about the LGBTQ, how that's affecting film and entertainment in general, stuff on sex/gender, the male-female dynamic right now, various traits and things that we have. And then I also had things on politics as well. So this culture of acceptance sort of in some ways falls into the political realm. As I said, I haven't done the political stuff yet. It'll take maybe a week or 2 of videos for that, and that's going to come after Marvel and Disney. But just know that I haven't talked about wokeness and all that stuff just yet, okay? With that being said, I haven't dug into it in great depth. With that being said, I do have to start off with this idea, is that I don't care who you are, I don't care whether you are a young, white, boy, man, etc. If you identify as heterosexual, or cis, I don't care what it is that you think you identify as. All of us, weirdly enough, have something in common with the LGBTQ group. I was really struggling to find the proper word for that. And no, I was not struggling with some derogatory or denigrative terms. All of us have something in common with them, and that is the culture of acceptance theory, or the culture of acceptance syndrome or idea, or whatever you want to call it. So the culture of acceptance goes like this, is that it is also somewhat of a generational cycle. What happens is that everybody in the world, obviously, and even in individualized societies, is not the same. We all know this, right? That's like, I shouldn't have had to even say it, but I'm saying it just because I want to start at the absolute very base level so that everybody can understand this as we build. Because of that, people start to go into their own little groupings. The problem is that society as it stands is built on general rules that everybody is supposed to follow, general norms that everyone is supposed to follow. So what happens is that small groups start to form, and they start to form these niches in which they feel like they can be themselves. Now, sometimes these groups are, and this is why I said the LGBTQ thing, sometimes these groups are separated by sexuality, sometimes they're separated by gender, sometimes they are separated by race, sometimes they're even separated by religion. It kind of doesn't matter the separation. What matters is how almost all of them act from one generation to the next. So here's what happens. The first generation of pretty much anything, any subgroup that is not part of just general society, and they don't live by general societal norms, social norms, they are almost always picked upon. They are in some ways persecuted. They are in some ways talked about. And depending on the group and depending on the time, of course, it can actually be very dangerous for them to be alive, to be around, to be trying to live a particular kind of life. We see this most evidently in and with racial groups, right? Specifically with Black people. I'm Black. In America, but also pretty much around the majority of the world outside of Africa. For many years, we've had racism. And so Black people were almost every place that we go, we are generally the minority. And we're one of the minorities of minorities. And so what happens is that when we're around other majorities, white people, white men, white women, people of other races, like if you go to China, right, you'll be a minority to Chinese people there. What happens, of course, is that Black people want to kind of group up with other Black people just to have a kind of kinship with those same people, because we know that they are most likely going through some of the same struggles that we are going through, and they might even be having some of the same kind of triumphs that we are also having. As I said, this is not exclusive to just one single group. I want to continue to stress that, so that when I do finally bring in the group, you guys will understand, like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense, okay? Because I've seen way too many videos online to where people start out and the argument is super logical, and somebody will follow the logic of the argument, and then they'll get to that one logical step, which it seems like it maybe has skipped just one step, and suddenly it's like, no, I don't believe that. You're being ridiculous. Like, no, I'm not being ridiculous. This is logic. So again, Black people will group up with other Black people. Same goes for any other smaller niche or specialized group of people, okay? So then what happens is that because they are together and they're together often enough, they start to form their own kinds of cultural markers, cultural identities, cultural things that they do, right? They start to form their own language or lingo. Again, we're doing that here, or at least I'm trying to do that with you all here on the channel. They form their own ways of doing things, their own ways of acting, their own ways of thinking about and viewing the world, etc., etc. The problem is that unfortunately, yes, while they are around each other, while Black people are around other Black people, and they may have a shorthand in which, you know, we get each other, we understand each other, we understand where this person is coming from, this person who I can call my brother or my sister, quote unquote. We can understand them more easily. We even have inside jokes, etc., etc. And these go almost across. Like, you can go from one grouping of Black people in one specific part of a country or city or what have you, and then go to a completely different grouping of Black people. But because they are all still part of the same society, they might still have some of the same or very similar cultural markers within them, right? So Black people, a lot of the slang that we have come up with over the years is it's kind of been nationalized in some sense amongst different Black people. So you can take a New York black person, and yeah, the accents will be super different, but put them with a Southern Georgian black person from Atlanta or wherever, and some of the same things. They'll be able to more effectively and more easily communicate and identify with each other because we have some of the same cultural norms. So that happens. But again, because the group, the people within the group, the people within the niche cannot be around each other all the time, 24/7. They can't close themselves off to everybody else. They have to go outside and, communicate, interact with other people who are not part of their specialized group. And therein starts to form the problems. Because as soon as they get out of that particular group, now they are faced once again with the hostility. They're faced once again with the stranger's eye, as I call it, or the stranger's gaze, to where something that they do that they think is normal, and it potentially would be normal within their own niche group, is not normal to other people. And so they might, as I said, get teased on it, or they might even have threats of death, threats of violence against their life, etc., etc. So what they then do is that in order to not have that threatening phase, they start to look for acceptance outside of the group. They want acceptance broadly in society. That's the first generation. So then the second generation starts to fight even harder for that kind of acceptance. They do that by basically trying to push their cultural norms out into, whether it be laws or into broader culture, into like art, entertainment, etc. They try to push it out more. They try to get more people involved in it. And as I said, they want to be broadly accepted, and they hope that laws and rules are made so that the idea of any kind of threats of violence or harm or harassment go away, because now there are so many people who sort of, even if they don't subscribe to this particular niche culture, they at least see that, okay, this particular culture has value. There's something that they are sort of bringing to the table. So maybe we should bend or reform or just altogether drop certain social norms in order for this part of the culture to actually exist within the overall, the broader part of culture, the broader part of society. That's the second generation. By the time the third and or fourth generation, and again, this is one of those things to where, just like with the generational of truth, beauty, and reality, when I talked about the Gen Zers and the Alphas, it depends which one of them will fully reset the cycle, but one of them is supposed to reset the cycle. This is almost the same kind of thing here. Sometimes it's the third generation or the third wave, so to speak. Sometimes it doesn't happen until the fourth generation. But ultimately, what happens is that by the third or fourth generation, there is so much, quote unquote, broad acceptance of this niche culture, of this minority culture, that now the people who were once part of that, who were born into that culture, find themselves essentially fighting with what is happening around them, because it's different now. So now this is where I go and I give you an example, going back to the LGBTQ thing. So as I have said, I watch everything. I'm a writer, so I feel like I should watch everything. I should consume as much as I can. I should read as much as I can in order to broaden my knowledge and to better understand humanity, so that I can in turn write better stories. So I was watching something that was very LGBTQ positive. This is not in any way, shape, or form some sort of oddity for me. I've watched plenty of stuff. Most of the stuff is straight, heterosexual stuff. But sometimes I'm like, okay, I need to watch something that's different than what I would normally watch. So I watched this documentary. This was some years ago, and I believe it was called Wig. It was at the moment, well, at that time, it was on HBO Max. I don't know if it was an HBO Max original. If so, it might still be on Max now, or it might have been just licensed out to them. I don't know, but I believe it was again called Wig. It featured Neil Patrick Harris. Of course, you know that he's gay. He's married and he has children. And the documentary wasn't really about him. The documentary was more so about the transformation of the ballroom scene within the LGBTQ, well, specifically within the gay, bisexual, and transgender community, and how that has changed throughout the years. And so they had some, of course, they were speaking to some younger people, some younger men who were cross dressers, and some were transgender people, and of course some were just gay men. Um, and one of the people who I believe was a cross dresser, he came out and he said, basically, he summed it up incredibly well. He said, yeah, I love that ballroom is being accepted now. And this was again, when you think about stuff like transgenders or trans people, right? We have for a number of years now, we featured things like um, the trans or the drag hour story time in libraries across the nation. Of course, yes, there's been pushback on that as of late, but we actually had that for years, even before this whole idea of wokeness and death to wokeness or anti-wokeness, all this foolishness came around. Um, there were trans drag hours. The show RuPaul's Drag Race that has been around for well over a decade, I do believe, at this point in time. The whole idea of acceptance of specifically gay men and men who I guess present in a feminine way, or who are transgender or what have you, that has really taken off. Like, it's really taken off. And so now, to where it used to be some sort of thing that you either didn't talk about, everybody sort of had a family member who was like, oh, you don't talk about Uncle Pete and his Uncle Pete and his roommate, right? Now it's very much so a broader part of culture, and it seems to be accepted by a lot of people. As I said, yes, there's a small contingent of people who are anti everything, it seems, but those people are few and far in between. They have the loudest voices. I'm not gonna lie, they definitely have the loudest voices, but they're not nearly as prevalent as they may think that they are. And so this one man, he was talking about how, yeah, I like that, but and he has been part of this ballroom and this transformation for years. For those of you who don't know what ballroom is, basically it was a whole bunch of gay and bisexual and transgender men or people who were born what is it? What did they say? Labeled masculine, who would, in the 80s, and I think it started maybe even in the late 70s, they would get together and they would dress up as like divas and stuff, like Donna Summers and Cher and all these great women that they admired, female performers, and they would put on their own little shows, and they would judge themselves, they would judge each other on who did the best at the show, who did the best dances, all this stuff. And it has become so mainstream that they even had a show called Pose about it, about this whole thing, this whole scene. And so the man was saying that, yeah, I love that it's mainstream now. However, I kind of miss the sort of quirkiness. I'm not going to use the word that he said. I kind of miss the quirkiness, is what he said, about, paraphrasing, about the original scene. Or in other words, he missed the fact that with things like drag shows now essentially becoming family outings in places not just in New York but around the country, he kind of misses the weirdness, the oddity of it. And reason why is because these shows used to be a place in which he and men like him would go to have their own sort of safe haven, to kind of get away from normal society that said that they had to be a certain way. Or in other words, because there has been so much of a wider acceptance of the gay ballroom and trans and cross-dressing culture, things of this nature, this particular man, this particular performer, he felt that the acceptance, yes, it was of course good, because it has led to far less violence, far more safety to be open and to be himself in real life. But he also, in some ways, saw that it was less freedom within the particular space that he and others like him crafted specifically for themselves. So going to, like, as I said, again, today you can quite literally, especially if you're like a free thinker or a more liberal person, you can take your entire family to a drag show. Not only that, but they have whole like drag and ballroom fests now in various cities, not just in New York, but they have whole fests where like it's outside and it'll last for a couple of days and stuff. This is something that they covered in Wig. and Neil Patrick Harris, his husband, they took their children. I think they have 2 or maybe 3 young children under the age of 10. They took them to this drag show thing, and it's like, that's way different. That's way different than some of the stuff that they covered earlier in the documentary, in which they were showing clips and things from the late 70s, early 80s ballroom. There, it was a lot more, the shows were a lot more X-rated. They were a lot more in your face. They were a lot stronger, I guess, in the gay culture, the gay community, et cetera, et cetera. They were basically shows that were run by a bunch of men and trans people, queer individuals that were, for the most part, they didn't have to hold back. In that little niche, in that little space that they created, they could fully be themselves without any sort of watchful eye looking at them, making sure that they performed a certain way, that they walked a certain way, that they talked a certain way, that they expressed their masculinity or their femininity, or whatever they were expressing, a certain way. It was all just, they could just be themselves. So what then is the group that's going through this sort of weird, I guess, battle right now? Well, for starters, literally every other group that has been going through it is still going through it. So, blacks, we as a group, we are going through it. Women, they are also going through it. LGBTQ, obviously, they are going through it. What happens is that in looking for a certain level of acceptance, one of the other things that, well, what comes with that, or what is sort of, I guess, coupled with the acceptance, is also this level of seriousness that wants to come so along with it. So yes, it's not just that these individualized niche groups want to be accepted into a broader society, but it also is that they want to be taken seriously when they are accepted into that society. It is this sort of level of wanting to be taken seriously that it is what has created the whole cultural appropriation idea within well, not just Black community, but again within a lot of minority communities as it goes to race and racial stuff. Again, a lot of Blacks have seen that when we do have a broader acceptance of us, and thusly of our culture, what tends to happen, and what has happened multiple times throughout history, is that people who are not really part of the culture will come in, and there's only a small percentage of people that actually really respect and love the culture, and fully respect and love and accept us as people. What really happens, what the majority of people that enter into the culture, what they do is that they start to make fun of it, they start to demean it, they start to change it in ways that we particularly don't like it being changed. And therein lies the whole cultural appropriation thing. Now, yes, we've had plenty of jokes and stuff about cultural appropriation. I just saw an episode of a new sitcom starring John Cryer. He's one of the people from 2.5 Men. If you guys watch that show, it was on for years. John Cryer and Donald Faison and Abigail Spencer, I believe, they are on this show called Extended Family. It's a new comedy. I doubt that it will stay for another season. I like it, but it's probably getting fairly low ratings. In which they celebrated St. Patrick's Day, and John Cryer is supposed to be Irish on there, and he was talking about cultural appropriation and all this stuff. And they were making jokes and stuff, trying to make light of this idea. But that is, it's not part of the problem. But again, it is one of those things that comes along with this culture of acceptance theory or paradigm, is that as this little smaller culture is becoming more broadly accepted, they want to be taken seriously. And oftentimes, the people who are doing the accepting don't want to take them seriously. So a big one with Black people is rap, right? You can go on to a lot of different channels. Most of them are conservative. A lot of them are like the far right leaning people and all that stuff. And I'm sure I have some of those on my channel here trying to bash me and say all sorts of things. But you can go into their channels and they make fun of rap all the time. They say that, it's not real music. It's this, it's that. They make their own stupid little raps and all that stuff. Yada, yada, yada. The big problem with that is that, again, within these subcultures, within these smaller niche cultures, you can almost always find a fairly large or decent percentage of people who look at some of the cultural norms that they have built within the subculture, and they look at it and they go, yeah, this actually is so important to me that it has in some ways or in many ways saved my life. So for some people, yeah, you can say, oh, rap is not music, it's not this, it's not that. But for others, it's like it is one of the things that has saved them their life. And it's not just the rappers who are participating in it. It's consumers as well who they listen to it, and there's something poignant and uplifting about it, or something that is real about it that they can connect with. It's something there. So again, when we talk about there are a few groups that are sort of new to this kind of cycle, this culture of acceptance, or this cycle of acceptance. The big one that we're talking about, especially when it comes to Marvel and all that stuff, is the weird acceptance of nerd culture. As I said, every group does not have to be a super duper serious thing. Okay, so yeah, blacks are a subculture, Asians, other minorities, women, even though they're technically, I believe, a global majority. But then you also have other things, right? So nerd is a subculture, and the funny thing about it is that yes, I'm sure there, as I just said, there are probably some far right wingers, but there are probably some of you who are some young white boys right now who you might be incels, you might not be. Maybe you're 16 years old or whatever, and you're sitting and you absolutely love comic books. You love the comic book movies. You love reading about the stuff. You just love everything about current comic books. 30, 40 years ago, late 70s, early 80s, you would have been a nerd. Like you would have been a nerd. You've been a geek. You would have been a freak. You would have been pushed to the side. Most likely you would have been threatened with light violence. Like it's nothing compared to what we as blacks have gone through in this country, right? You would not have found yourself, you would have still been alive, let's say that, but you probably would have been bullied. I'm sure there are probably some Gen Xers who might be watching some of this stuff. Y'all might have been bullied when you were growing up, stuffed into some lockers, given some wedgies, dunked into some toilets, etc., etc. But you found solace in your own small niche nerd culture. Maybe you had a tough day from your bully at school, but then you went home and you went to a comic book store on the way home, and they had the latest Spider-Man, or they had the latest Batman, and you got that thing and you read it, and your friend who also was a nerd, you talked to him on the super long corded phone, and you guys just nerded out for hours on end, talking about all the great, amazing things that the new Spider-Man did, etc., etc. Or you played Dungeons and Dragons, which was a super nerdy thing. Or maybe you grew up in the 90s and you were a nerd. We still had nerd culture that wasn't really accepted in the 90s. Maybe you, like me, you were, I guess this is more of the 2000s, and that's when I was a kid, is that Dragon Ball Z, right, was a big thing. And look, all the nerds, all the nerdy boys, we was running around talking about Kamehameha, right? Trying to go Super Saiyan, etc., etc. There were things that were super nerdy, and yeah, they were kind of dumb, but they allowed for us to connect with each other and to get away from. Now, I wasn't really bullied. I just wasn't really bullied like that. But they allowed for us to build up small subcultures within the larger culture to where we could feel a different kind of freedom. Now you zoom forward to today, and we have, again, if you look around, things like superhero movies, even some video game movies now, they're the biggest things out there. They are making buku money. Everybody knows about them. Tons of people still talk about them. They are the toast of the town of Hollywood. But what are some of the problems that are now seeping out from this bigger acceptance? Well, and it's weird too, because like I said in some of my previous videos, I chose Dune Part 1 as the movie for a reason, because more and more it continues to prove to me at least, that it is the perfect example of almost everything wrong with Hollywood. I have not seen Dune Part 2 yet, and I have not read any articles or anything concerning it, but I did catch a Twitter thread, or I guess an X thread at this point, and they were talking about some of the exact same things, that I said were probably going to be a problem in Dune Part 2. And that is that they departed from the book. They changed things within the movie that weren't previously in the book. And boy, the people who love the book, they do not like that. They do not like that. The problem becomes, again, now nerd culture is more accepted. People are openly nerds. They talk about being nerds. We even had that weirdo fad / trend years ago of like sports people, athletes. Oh boy, athletes coming into their pressers wearing fake glasses to look like, what's the character? Steve Urkel, or to look like some other nerdy character, right? Nerd culture, and even not only nerd culture, but nerd fashion and things of that nature. All of these things are weirdly a thing now. There is greater acceptance of nerd culture. But as we have more acceptance of it, the things that we love, the things that nerds love the most, the characters, the stories that are told, etc., oftentimes start to get watered down. They start to get watered down. They start to get made more for the masses, which again, on one hand, it is good. It's a good thing that these things are more accepted, because then we can potentially see even more stuff. We could see new and different ideas pop up. We can see characters that we absolutely love be on screen and rendered in ways that we never thought that they could be rendered. And we can have a ton of more discussion about them. But at the same time, it also feels weird because, there's tons of people who kind of enter into the culture. They enter into the niche. They enter into this group, but they aren't really, truly, fully part of the group. They come in and you can almost instantly tell, like, yeah, this person is a poser. They don't read the comic books, or they haven't watched all the movies and TV shows, or they haven't done this, they haven't done that. They don't know the language or the lingo that we use. They don't know what being nerfed is. They don't know the superpowers of these superheroes. And on the one hand, it's just like, well, it's okay. But then also on the other hand, there's a certain part of us, a certain part of nerds that kind of freak out about it, because they're like, wait a minute, this is the only exposure that you potentially will ever get to this thing that I absolutely love, this thing that I have devoted a lot of my life to, or a lot of my time to. Just like there are some Black people or some music fans that feel like rap is this truly high art, in that it has saved their lives in some ways, or like any other music, whether it's R&B, or that there are some writings, some feminist writings that women in their subculture, they feel like, the feminist mystique, it changed my entire way of thinking about being a woman, etc., etc. There are certain things that are like, oh man, without Spider-Man, or without this particular character, or without having read this particular thing, I don't know if I would have made it through a particularly tough time in my life. That's what some nerds might think. Like I was being heavily bullied, or I was being this, or I was being that. And this character, I don't want to assign too much importance, but it also felt in some ways like it saved my life. So when that is not being either honored in the way that we think that it should, or it's not being taken as seriously as we think that it should, even when we see there are a lot more people accepting of us, it becomes a problem. And this is one of the things that I'm seeing is happening with the MCU fan base right now, is that we are so comic book fans in general are now being so agitated by the changes, small changes that seem almost insignificant, but they're changes that are being made, that it feels like going from book to screen, that it feels like, oh man, they're just disrespecting us and not taking the character seriously. I saw a ton of people like, oh, why is the first Captain Marvel that we're seeing on screen a woman? Why can't they have kept it a man? Like, because Captain Marvel's been a man for years and they didn't change it until I think it was the 90s. That woman, she was always Miss Marvel, but now, it's like there's always these tiny little things, these tiny changes that people are not happy with, because it feels in some ways like it is their very culture that is changing, or that is being changed, and all of it is being done, it feels like, for profit. It's the exact same thing as any other kind of cultural appropriation. Like, well, they changed Captain Marvel because Marvel knew, and there was tons of talk and discussion online from people who weren't necessarily super duper big comic book fans that, oh, Marvel doesn't have a true female superheroine that leads a movie. Why don't they have one? It's been so many years. Why haven't they had one? When will they get one? So it was like, okay, let's do Captain Marvel. And then people started complaining about that. Is, oh. So what's really the end to this video? To be honest with you, I kind of don't have an end because I don't have an answer to what we do about this situation. Number one, is it a problem? It may be a problem in some ways to some people. Yeah, you may feel slighted that they are changing things about your favorite character, your favorite comic book, your favorite book, etc., etc. Doom Part 2 apparently goes so far from the book that it loses all of the weirdness and eccentricity of the Doom book. It is like the Doom universe is super weird. It's super crazy. It's incredibly strange. I'll just put it to you like this: if you guys have never read the book, in the Doom Part 2 movie, and as I said, I've never seen the movie. I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm not paying to see it in theaters because I hate it. I didn't like Doom Part 1. But in Doom Part 2, yes, they have taken the source material seriously, but have they taken the source material too seriously in some ways to try to, I guess, ground the story in such a way that makes it more accessible to everyone? And in thusly doing that, they've taken out the weirdness. Just put it this way: can you see, after seeing Doom Part 2, can you see a movie or any rendition of this particular Doom universe in which a young man decides to turn himself into a giant worm? Like, can you see that? Because it's in the books. It is in the books. It's in there. So what is my point in bringing this up? My point in bringing this up is essentially that it's kind of to ask the question of, are we as nerds or even as cinephiles, are we ready and willing to, in some ways, give up on some of the specificity, on some of the details, on some of the things that may make our most favorite characters or our most favorite storylines or whatever? Are we willing to give up some of those things, some of the weirdness in the things that we like, in order to have a broader acceptance? Or are we going to go back to the, like, yeah, you know what? No, we are nerds and we like comic books. We actually like this stuff. You should just make these films for us. Don't water things down. Don't change stuff from the books or from whatever that this stuff is based on. Don't change that stuff, because that was kind of what we loved about it in the first place. Just because you want to make more money. Are we going to go with that? Because that in some ways undoes all of the work that the previous generations kind of did to try to make this idea of accepting people who are like 30, 40, 50 years old, but still like reading comic books or still like watching cartoons with superheroes and stuff like that. It's funny too, though, because as I said, the paradigm is strange, right? In years past, in the 80s, when there was that big sort of comic book and nerd culture, you would have usually jocks, athletes, people of that nature would stuff nerds into lockers and stuff like that, make them do their homework for a night, things of that nature. Now, strangely enough, the biggest, I guess you can call them, bullies of nerds or of the nerd culture, weirdly enough, are like the theater geeks in some ways, the cinephiles. I just even read an article today where Gwyneth Paltrow was like, okay, enough with the comic book movies. It's like, you realize that, granted, she's a Nepo baby, but it's like, you realize that if you had gone to a public high school, probably anywhere else in the country when you were growing up in the 90s or in the 80s, whenever the heck she was a teenager, I don't really know, that if you were like a theater person, chances are high that you would probably be, granted, she's a woman, so, and she's a pretty woman, so she probably wouldn't have done it, wouldn't have had to suffer it as much. But if you were a guy and you were a theater geek, yeah, you might get stuffed into a locker right next to a nerd. Now it's almost like the theater geeks are walking off of the stage after having just performed, I don't know, Robin Hood, a version of Robin Hood or of Shakespeare, in which they literally had to wear tights and leotards as they were talking about what light beyond my window breaks. And then they walk off the stage and they laugh at, like, you stupid nerds reading comic books. Spider-Man is for kids, and then shoving them in the lockers. Like, that's almost the kind of paradigm that we have right now. That's where we are, to where, yeah, the very actors and actresses who are taking these jobs are like, yeah, you know, nerds. Oh, they're so terrible. Nerd culture. Like, you always have, not always, but it's like at least 75% of the time you'll have an actor or an actress sign up for some big movie, some IP that is huge, and they'll come out and say, yeah, well, you know, I didn't even read the book. And it's like, what? Huh? Like, has everybody involved in Dune actually read the books of Dune? I don't know. It's just, and again, like I said, I don't have the answer to what we do. I don't, because as Black people, we have never been able to figure this out. We just haven't. Cultural appropriation is still a thing, but we're also like, well, we want the acceptance, because we definitely don't want to go back to the old days. We definitely don't want to go back to pre-civil rights and stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, we will. I just don't know. I don't know. The only thing I can say is that we need to, and we should be aware of this paradigm as we go forward, and we criticize things, especially filmmakers, on asking them, like, well, why did they change this thing? Why did they change that? Why is this way? Again, we could probably have things be different, but they probably would go back to, in some ways, we would probably go back to that time in which we weren't accepted as much, in which our sort of cultural ideas and our nerdiness wasn't as mainstream as it is now. Are we just like that older, I think he was black, transgender or cross-dressing performer, in which we kind of miss the weirdness, the quirkiness, the eccentricity, the safeness of nerd culture, where it felt like it was a super tight-knit community and nobody in it was a poser, because we all knew the same kind of language and the same kind of lingo, and we all talked the same, and we knew about these characters, we knew about the backgrounds, we knew about all that stuff? Or do we still want to see these massive movies that everybody goes to, even though they don't know anything about Dune? They don't care about the details of Dune. They don't care about the themes of Dune, or about the themes of Spider-Man, or about the themes of any of that stuff, even though it's important to us. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. So anyways, yeah, that was pretty much the video. That was pretty much what I wanted to say. Obviously, this was longer than I wanted it to be. I apologize for that. I don't have a signing. So while I don't have an official sign off yet, I guess I should do the whole please like, comment, share, and if you so desire and you want to see more, subscribe. But more importantly, I will ask that you please go and purchase one of my books. They are mostly ebooks, and pretty much they are all under $10. See if any of my work is actually any good, if it lives up to any of the things that I'm talking about here on my channel, specifically with the entertainment industry videos. So please go purchase my books. All of my links are down below. Thank you.